Hello and welcome to the New Moon Tarot reading for the new moon that is falling in the UK at least on Wednesday the 16th of August at 10:38 a.m. I haven't done the new moon reading for quite some time. I'm thinking the last time that I did it was about March. A lot has happened between then and now. And I know that I warned people that I probably wouldn't be able to release the new moon reading every new moon, but events transpired that just made it pretty much impossible for me to do anything for several months. And actually that gave me some time to think about what it is that I wanted to do, and I went backward and forward quite a lot. And I'm just going to do the reading today and then see how I feel over the next few weeks with what it is that I'm kind of weighing up. I think that I'm actually going to do a podcast about it, but it's going to be on my subscriber channel, a little extra. So I'll probably be doing that in the next week or a few days. And really about my thought processes about tarot and how I feel it can be most useful. But in the meantime, I am going to go straight into the reading. I'm going to dispense with all of the introductions, and so I'm not going to explain the cards at all apart from a very, very brief sentence or so to introduce each card. So I have the cards shuffled, dealt out, 3 cards face down in front of me, and we're going to go straight into card number 1, which is the foundation to the reading. So this is something that has happened recently or in the far past, or both, but in one way or another it has already happened or is in the process of completing in some way in a particular form. So there is very little you can do to change that. But what that means is that it forms a particularly strong and hopefully cohesive or coherent foundation to what is going on in your life today, whether that's going on close at home, right up in your own world, or somewhere a little bit further out, but where you can still feel the ripples sort of washing against you. So this is the foundation card, and it is a major arcana. It is the 9, which is the Hermit. I'm pausing very slightly because I was thinking how apropos that is in terms of my own process. So it'll be interesting to talk about that, and still while separating myself off from the cards, because of course it will apply very differently to each one of you. But the Hermit is a time of contemplation, of going within, of seeking out an inner truth. It is not necessarily easy. So I think one of the things that happens is that when we get a major arcana card, we'll very often feel like it should be, because we've received it in a reading, it should be immediately accessible to us. And the thing about major arcana cards in general is that they reside in the deep unconscious, and we are simply getting a hint of their presence in terms of the card then appearing in a reading. Now, it may be that we may relate immediately to it in the way that I just did when I turned it over, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the process of the Hermit, how it is that we've experienced it, is quite as accessible or quite as successful, in inverted commas, that we'd like to think it is. The suggestion of quiet contemplation, of going within, has a kind of inference that that there will be fruits of your labours, and in some ways there will be, but I think in other ways it may not be entirely expected, the Hermit's route through everything. You may not find it as easy as you'd hoped. You may find it confusing. You may find that what you are discovering isn't actually what you thought you were going to discover, or what you intended to discover when you made an intention to look within. So the Hermit can throw up all different kinds of things, and I think the whole point about the Hermit is that it brings us to a still and steady enough place to be able to eventually deal with what it is that we find. And sometimes coming to that still and steady place will be hard. It'll be difficult to do. It will take quite some time to find stillness. And when we do find it, it may be sporadic, it may be fleeting. We may have moments of it, it may go away, there may be periods of high activity. But actually the backdrop of everything, what's going on, is one that demands more thought, that demands more contemplation, that demands a period of sequestering away from the rest of the world. And by that, it doesn't mean that you just close your front door and you say, right, bye folks, I'll see you in a few months' time. That may happen, but it probably won't, because we all have lives to live. But rather that the flavor of the day, or the flavor of the week, or the several months, sometimes years, is one of feeling introverted, introspective, of feeling not quite part of life, feeling as if other people's lives are going on and life is happening elsewhere, but things aren't quite moving in the way that they were for us. It may, as I said, be frustrating. It may be something we're entirely prepared for. It just depends on our mindset, where we are, and it's got nothing to do with whether we did something right or wrong as to whether the hermit is a difficult or an easy experience. It just simply is the hermit being the hermit for us in its own specific way. I think one of the keys to understanding the hermit is the reason why the hermit is who he is, or the archetype has become what it is through trial and error. It is not a simple process, as I said, and I would suggest that the archetype holds in it all potentials for the experience of that inwardness. So it can be a time of peace, it can also be a time of turmoil. And as I alluded to, the time of confusion, a time of anger, a time of feeling like you're making far less progress that you wanted to, or where you feel like you're not really going anywhere at all. And none of those things is a mistake, and every single one of those things is very much part of the hermit archetype. When I used to work with clients, one of the things that a lot of them would go through, and it was mirrored by my own experience in therapy, are periods of horrible, gut-wrenching, uncomfortable confusion, of a real deep visceral discomfort. And none of that is accidental, and everything about that is by design, because as soon as we start to get still, as soon as we start to ask, what's going on inside, that what's going on there, what's going on with me, is the hint of the hermit coming in. As soon as we do that, we invite an answer. And we have spent so much time moving around in our outward activities to, in some ways, to avoid the answer, or in other ways, just simply because we're not at a stage in life where we're ready to hear it, which is one and the same thing, really. That when the answer does start to creep into the edge of our awareness, it may not be the answer, we're not seeing it in front of us, but we can feel something coming along that is inviting us to take a look. That is not the easiest place to be. In fact, it can be one of the hardest places of all. So the hermit, while it looks peaceful, the hermit, I think, is the kind of archetypal picture of the hermit is really the pure archetype. It's what we strive for. I think it's seldom what we experience, or if we do, it is in moments, those moments of clarity. And that is exactly how the hermit should be showing up if it is showing up that way for you in your life. So this is foundational. This is something that you have been through. It may be something that you have recently been through, that you're coming out of, but there will still be vestiges of it. It may be something that has woven through the fabric of your life all the way through up until now. It may be something that you started many years ago, many moons ago. So it's really going to be highly dependent on your own circumstances, but in one way or another, the hermit is key right now for you. Just to go into a sort of a slightly more theoretical explanation of the card, because most of the major arcana cards up until now have been about external development, the fools that's stepping out into the unknown, the magician creating one's world, and then the high priestess of being able to connect with something that is from beyond this world, and the empress being the natural cycles of the world, and then the Emperor laying down the law in your own world, and then followed by the Hierophant, which is the seeking of a spiritual path, a way of moving through the world, and then the Lovers of connecting with a kind of duality and an ability to ground down into this world, and then the Chariot, which is about then lining everything up in order to move forward, and the strength of coming together in Trump 8 of the sort of our spiritual and our animal nature. We then get, so all of those are kind of out in the world doing those things. I know that the High Priestess doesn't seem like that, but in a way it is, because it's about translating messages from somewhere else through us into our lives. The Hermit then, after all of that, is that moment of integration. It is an invitation to integration. And so it is about finding the light within. It's to go back in to find that light. So in the Waite-Smith version of the card, which is very, very lightly sketched, on the left-hand side of this particular card, under the cheekbone of the face of the Hermit, which is very James Dean-like, you have that tending to the inner light within. The inner light within, you know what I mean. And the thing about it is that very often when we turn our attention inward, that light can be very, very, very dim, if non-existent. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's simply that we have yet to recognize it and to connect with it. And once we connect with it, then we can tend to it, and we will never lose it again to the same capacity. If we do, we'll find it faster. If we do lose it, we'll know what we need to do. You know, the callings will be more urgent. So, and it's interesting that the Hermit is facing off to the left. It's about the past. This is contemplation of where one is now because of where one has been in the past, of dealing with perhaps unfinished business of one form or another. And then on the face of the Hermit, the main face, this James Dean face, is, and I don't know why he chose James Dean, because it very clearly is James Dean. If you have any ideas, let me know. But on the face is a maze, and it feels like an interminable maze. I'm not even sure if the maze works, and maybe that's the point, is that there is something here about going down all of these different paths, but then coming to realize that actually you are the center of the maze, that there is something here that is defies any kind of logic and will possibly surprise you in terms of what it reveals, and it in some way takes you closer to home in a single step, but sometimes it can take a very long time to get there. So I hope that that makes sense in terms of the Hermit, but in one way or another, you will be familiar, whether it is very recently or in the past or both, with a period of turning inward, a period of feeling sequestered from everyday life, whether you were joined into that life or not, somehow experiencing a sense of separateness, which is that call or has been that call to contemplate where it is that you are, how it is that you got here, and what it is that you are really supposed to be doing, or how it is that you're really supposed to be being. That's foundational. That is in some way going to be playing into the major theme of this month. And I can really feel, I haven't turned the card over, I can feel it because I'm recording this pretty close to the new moon itself. I'm only about 3 hours away. I got up very, very early this morning. Just thought I might as well get up and record the reading as close to the new moon as possible. So the Hermit is going to equip you in some way for the next card, which is a major theme that's coming up this month, whether it's a theme in the world, in your life, in the lives of those closest to you, or in some way all three, or a combination thereof, but it will be significant. So the theme or the current weather for this month is the Ten of Swords. The Ten of Swords is one of those cards, particularly in this deck, where there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that of the kind of mood that Carl Röhrig wanted to bring across. The Ten of Swords, I think, is one of those cards in the deck that sort of raise the hackles on the back of one's neck in some way or cause one to shrink away. Now, of course, having had the hermit, one is not going to shrink away as much as one might do without the hermit. So that tending of the inner light has entailed being able to look inside and see some of what has been going on. And of course, as I was talking about the hermit, that can be a deeply, deeply uncomfortable process. So the hermit can be one where we come face to face with aspects of ourselves, with our shadow, that are ones that that we have well, successfully or unsuccessfully avoided up until that point, and for good reason, because when they look like something that they do in the Ten of Swords, then of course we're going to feel, most of us, like we don't particularly want to look at them. But the hermit has in some way equipped us to look at them and also to understand what's really going on here. Because what's going on the surface of the Ten of Swords is not actually what's going on underneath the surface. It's connected, of course, it is one and the same thing, but there is something different. And of course, the reason for this is because we are in the realm of the mind, and the mind at its most complex and complicated. We are in swords, we are at a 10. It is the end of something. It is the absolute zenith of something. In fact, if you look at the two cards side by side, you've got the 9 of the Hermit, you've got the 10 of the Ten of Swords, and which is called Ruin in this, and then you've got the striking contrast of both the shapes and the colours. So you have this clear face with these very clear eyes in the Hermit, and then you have this mishmash of faces with 3 eyes, bloodshot, particularly the large one in the middle, and only part of a jaw. There's a breast, there's a bit of a brain, there's all kinds of other things going on. It's almost as if there's kind of Mayan symbology there as well, and lots of reds, whereas there's only a tinge of red in the Hermit, as you can see, which I quite like, because what it's saying is that in some way it is connected with the Ten of Swords, but in another way it isn't. And where you've got the 10 swords sort of all pointed in at that kind of red glow where all of the points meet, actually in the Hermit there is spaciousness. And in fact, I can see feathers, something feathery there. So it's interesting that feathers are sometimes quills, which are swords, in some of the tarot decks. So you've got that going on. But in some way it has been synthesized through the observational and powers of the Hermit. The Hermit's ability not only to observe and to witness what's going on, but also to stay the course, even if that course has been terribly uncomfortable, and even if it's felt like it has not been a sort of textbook means of staying the course, where it has felt like 1 step forward and 2 steps back, as opposed to 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The Hermit doesn't necessarily do things perfectly when the Hermit comes out in each of us. And I think that that's one thing that you need to emphasize, is that if you look at it and go, oh, well, I just can't do the Hermit well. I can't do the Hermit perfectly. I've never managed to do that. That's kind of irrelevant. That's not really part of the Hermit's remit to do something well or not. It's simply to be curious enough about going within to invite that experience. And very often then, when we invite that experience, we are compelled to go through it. Very often we'd never choose to do it ourselves. And being compelled to go through it isn't a failure either. It's just simply the course of how the Hermit unfolds in our lives. So the Hermit is very well acquainted with this idea of the Ten of Swords, as will you be, and as you will specifically be right now in terms of how you've experienced the Ten of Swords in the past and how you now understand it, which is possibly, potentially different to the way that you may have understood the Ten of Swords when you first encountered the card. And we're going to unpack the Ten of Swords now a little bit more to understand it more in terms of the theoretical but also experiential possibilities and potentials, but also to to situate it very much in the reading as it stands today. So the first thing I'm going to say is something that sounds a bit weird, but it just came up now, and it's kind of been just there at the edge of my awareness in terms of talking about it. But I'm going to speak about it. When children get viruses, and sometimes when adults get viruses, but particularly when children get viruses, and I remember this with my son when he was little, the virus can be really quite horrific and acute, and it can look quite scary as a parent to see a child getting a virus, because their temperatures spike and they get quite listless, and that is just the way that a virus sort of exhibits itself in children a lot of the time. But one of the things that happens then with a virus is that it will often then break out into a rash, a skin rash, and that can be quite alarming for many of us as parents to see this rash. But the rash actually means something different. What the rash is a clearing of the virus out of the system. So it is the sort of visible display of something that is on its way out. And the Ten of Swords is a very visible, visceral experience of something that is on its way out. It's the last chance saloon for any of the madness, and I say that in inverted commas, that has been going on in one's psyche, in one's mind, or a specific sort of thought process or a specific experience that one has been fixated upon, that has in some way felt like it's turned grotesque, that in some way it has been subverted, it has not lived up to our desires, hopes or expectations, our dreams, but in some way turned nightmarish. As soon as we tried to grasp it, it changed form. As soon as we tried to chase it, it kind of turned on us and became something else. And so the Ten of Swords is this expression of a viral rash. It is something that is very present. It definitely suggests the presence of something, but it is the presence of something that has reached a point where it is about to shift. And that is also suggested in the number 10 itself. It is going to shift, and what it would shift, or what's implied in terms of that, it's going to shift into the Ace of Pentacles. So it is something else that is going to happen from this. It's new. There is the seed of a new beginning. Now, obviously, you'll need to work to grasp that seed, to work with it, to nurture it. But in the meantime, what you have to go through is this changing process of the Ten of Swords that really is to allow something to come up, to clear out, to clear through. And the Hermit and that moment of contemplation that is available to you will be that moment that will give you that enough distance between the Ten of Swords and yourself, to not lose yourself in it, to not identify with it, but rather to understand finally what it is, so that you can let it go, so you can let it pass. That you may want to grab it, it may even sort of brush alongside you on its way out. It may be that it attracts your attention, that you get distracted by it, that in some way you are successful in kind of grabbing and holding on to it for a while. But the Hermit will not let you do that for long. This thing is shifting, and there is that opportunity for you to recognize what it is, which is the distortion of a wish. And it is the distortion, it's the reality of what you were wishing for. Your hopes are not what they seem. What you had been pinning your hopes on is not actually there, and it probably wasn't in existence anyway. It's something that you have been trying to, in some way, forge and shape inwardly, trying to compromise your way into a wish. And it just simply defies any kind of effort on your part to make it happen in the way that you want it to, in the way that you've always sort of envisioned it happening. It's one of those things that just simply, as soon as you grab it, it changes form. And this again will be different for each one of us, but what it will have for all of us is this feeling of a nightmarish edge to something where it has just become so overblown that you start to see the ridiculousness of the situation. You start to see the your predicament with the clarity of the hermit. The hermit is able to step forward and in some way enable you to view the madness of a particular way of thinking. And I'm using very highly vivid visual language, but really sometimes it is that moment where you go, what the fuck was I thinking? What the fuck am I doing here? That is the Ten of Swords, when there is that clarity of what is it that you have been doing all this time. It's that moment where everything starts to morph, and then you get this figure in front of you that's in the Ten of Swords. And while if you don't understand the Ten of Swords fully, you'll look at that figure immediately and go, that's that. I really don't want to encounter that. Actually, through the eyes of the hermit, it has created that figure to show you that how distorted a particular viewpoint is. This is about the distortion itself, not the creature. The creature is the product of a distortion. It's not real. And the idea of ruin is the destruction of a particular wish, a particular whim, a particular way that you have been trying to force something down a route, whether that's in your mind, in your heart, whether you have physically tried to do that. And it kind of just, as I said, it just immediately you start to see this folly. And that ruin is that moment of the realization of the uselessness of the endeavor, or the madness of the endeavor. There has to be then in that, it's that kind of giving up of a dream that's turned into a nightmare. So when I look at the card and the writing of the card, I see fear of the destructive energies of accumulated anger and negative thinking. So it isn't actually the destructive energies of accumulated anger and negative thinking. I think you've probably experienced those before. It is the fear of the destructive energies, and actually the fear of one's own anger, the fear of one's own negative thoughts can sometimes cause us to spin these yarns in our minds and adopt these fantasies that seem amazing. And of course they are. They're designed to be amazing so that we don't deal with anger, so that we don't deal with negative thinking. We don't look at where it is that our thoughts have gone astray, that in some way our thoughts have been our own undoing. And so what we'll do to avoid that is that we will disappear off into fantasy. And very often we will try and impose that fantasy onto our everyday lives. And when we're younger, I think it works, and then it stops working. It works up to a point, and then it really doesn't work anymore. And I think particularly when we reach a certain age, and if we're lucky, this happens to us when we're younger rather than when we're older, so that we can get it and we can get that viral rash through our system, relatively soon. Then we are confronted with the reality. So one of the most nightmarish films, and I am not suggesting that this is going to be your lived experience about this, but it is a fantastic metaphor for the Ten of Swords, is Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. Now, David Lynch, as a transcendental meditator, and I think his transcendental meditation practice is very much instrumental in this. He is able to connect with the unconscious really well. Maybe it's just me, well, I mean, I know it's not just me, but maybe it's not a universal thing, but one of the things that I find with David Lynch's films is that he manages uncannily to tap into and to bring to the surface unconscious thinking, so that if you're trying to go with a movie that makes sense, that makes logical, rational, reasonable sense, David Lynch's films will work up to a point until they don't, and then everything seems to fall apart in terms of reason or logic, or or being rational. There are these moments that you think, oh my goodness, it's all going normally, this is fantastic, and then something will subvert that. Something will come up that really feels incredibly eerie or creepy or uncanny, or it doesn't belong there, and yet a part of us can identify with it. And that's David Lynch's ability to understand and show the power of the unconscious in film. And Mulholland Drive is about this because it is an incredibly vivid, lurid, sort of blown up idea. Well, this is what I think it is, of disappointment. It is the fantasy that somebody has spun about being accepted, about being wanted, to being able to have the fulfillment of their dream brought into full, technicolor, quite literally fruition, that is then totally imploded by this breaking through into this fantasy of the reality, which shatters everything. And it's metaphorical, and it is in true Lynchian fashion totally over the top, but to make a point. And that point is that the inability to look inside at the potential for failure, at anger, at disappointment, at things that aren't pleasant to think about, to shy away from that can create all kinds of fantasies that will inevitably lead to the Ten of Swords. And then there are these moments in our lives where we are confronted with the shattering of illusions. And I would suggest that the Ten of Swords here is in some way connected with that, but because it's preceded by the Hermit, it's more of a release than anything else. It is more of that display of that viral rash coming up to clear. It is not a Mulholland Lynchian moment. And any of us who have seen that movie who can totally relate to it, we can relate to it simply because we've had those moments, even if they are milder in form throughout the course of our lives. But I'd suggest in the context of this particular reading, this month, it is more of a process of recognizing the Ten of Swords for exactly what it is. It doesn't mean that it's going to leave you unscathed. It doesn't mean that in some way you are going to bypass it. And in fact, trying to bypass it is to try and dive back into the very fantasy land that ended up in the Ten of Swords in the first place. But rather to understand that a lot of the emotional processes around this are ones that have already happened. So the emotional processes are ones that you're familiar with. There shouldn't be anything that comes up that isn't familiar, and that then through that familiarity you can understand it and know it for what it is, and in the process of knowing it, it moves through. There's nothing here that you have to do. I think the doing thing stems from the beingness, and the beingness is simply the knowing this, the knowing what's going on, the understanding of what's going on, and in that moment, then you can go, oh, okay, and then that can be let go of as something shifts, something moves through. It becomes untenable, and in a way that brings absolute relief. The understanding that you don't have to keep up the charade anymore in one particular form or another. There is something where you don't have to play that game anymore. And in fact, in the Ten of Swords moment there, it might be just that moment of absolute release. It could be complete relief of understanding that no longer applies, it's no longer relevant, it's time to move on, and then shift into something that is potentially far more fruitful, which is that seed of the Ace of Discs that's implied after the Ten of Swords. So in terms of that Ten of Swords moment, it is, the reading is not designed to make you hypervigilant. This is not about you now being hypervigilant for the Ten of Swords, but rather just to understand that in some way, one way or another, in one form or another, an old, well-known pattern will come up. And you know, with the Hermit activated in you, exactly how to be and what to do with that. That doesn't mean that you suddenly behave in a way that is entirely saintly through the whole process, that you manage to hermit fantastically through the whole process so that it's like water off a duck's back. That's not it. We are human. We are complex. We're complicated. The Ten of Swords reside in us along with every single other card. This is more rather about you being you and understanding that the you that can recognize and know that Ten of Swords for what it is absolutely the right you to be doing the understanding and the witnessing of that. To remind yourself that this is in some way coming up because you are ready to understand and to see and to know it. And also that it is coming up because it is shifting. It is moving on through. I've said this many times with the Ten of Swords, but I think it's a really good one to say because, again, it's a kind of over-emphatic analysis of the card, this particular interpretation. But the Ten of Swords is, in one person's words when I was at a tarot conference, that it's the card of the drama queen. Now that sounds scathing, but actually if you look under the surface of that, there is a drama queen element to it because the drama queen is making mountains out of molehills. And I'm not suggesting that the Ten of Swords is a molehill. I'm not here to diminish any kind of experience. But that there is nothing new in the Ten of Swords. There is nothing new to you. You know this one really, really well. It's just that when something is in the process of transforming, an aspect of our psyche will, some part of our psyche, whether we want to or not, most of the time will want to cling on to what is known, even if what is known is crap. And it's that sort of, I've got this visual image of something walking out the door and a person sort of clinging on to that person's ankles, screaming and kicking, even though that person is absolutely going to walk out the door. And there may be an aspect of ourselves that does that with the Ten of Swords, even if that person really should be walking out the door and they're no good for us. So that drama queen aspect can be a way of distracting also from the pain of something that is going, because even though it needs to go, there is often a sense of loss, even if it's the understanding of the loss of time, that we have spent so much time invested in something that it's and then we have to mourn the loss of that time. It's that idea of that sunken costs. I put so much time, so much effort into this, I can't let it go. And the what ifs, what could I have done differently? Where would I be today if I hadn't done this? All of this is a waste of time. The sunken cost fallacy is that idea of clinging on to something because you've put so much time into it. Well, those costs have been sunk into it. Those aren't coming back. And the idea of that hermit again is presence. It's understanding the present. There is no time like the present to change, because even if you can't get back that time or that effort or whatever it is that you can't get back, what you can do is start something else now and not invest any more time, not grab that thing by the ankles and scream and wail as it shifts out the door, but rather just simply to stand up, dust yourself off and say goodbye and then close the door after it leaves, understanding that was an inevitable part of the process of having started to look within some time ago, whether that was recently or whether that was way in the past. That Ten of Swords is on its way out. Give it its due recognition as something that has been an integral part of your life, because I think very often we need to look at something fully in order to understand its leaving, in order to see it move through. If we don't look at it fully, we can't recognize what it is when it moves out the door, which means that if it knocks on the door again, then we won't recognize it when we open it. I think there is something here about dealing with unfinished business simply by looking it fully in the face. And by looking it fully in the face, it starts to shift, and we start to understand that what we're looking at is not necessarily what we feared it was, but rather it is symbolic of something else. And that symbolism is of something to do with our own distorted thinking, of our own way of trying to rationalize something that can no longer make sense anymore in the life that we are choosing to live. That's the Ten of Swords. You'll know it when you see it, and it probably will not be the experience that you're thinking it's going to be. It may surprise you completely, and not necessarily in an unpleasant way, by the way. I mean in the way that you are able to recognize and to deal with it. So the Hermit stands true and strong in all of this, and is just the most perfect card to be next to the Ten of Swords in this case. And then the final card, which is the Tool card or Agency card. Well, we've already had the Tool card as much in the Hermit, but it'll be interesting to see how the three cards are interacting. So somewhere that you can interact or react meaningfully or engage meaningfully with the current weather, with the Ten of Swords. And that is the Eight of Wands. And that is immediately, I think, to let something in. There is going to be a swiftness in that in terms of engagement with something. It is going to be, we've had a major, we've had a swords, we've got wands now. There is a shifting of perspective, quite a rapid one. It might be the shifting of perspective in as much as you are in a train and the landscape changes completely. You know, it's as if it is coming towards you, you are moving through it. That the wands, the Eight of Wands is an electric kind of meeting of something. Now there's a meeting here of two people, and that may well be something that happens. It could be a meeting of minds, it could be a meeting of another part of the psyche. There is a clarity here. That channel has been cleared. If you look at those two sort of, I don't know, they look like gummy kind of streaks above the facial distortions in the Ten of Swords. Those have now, to me, shifted into those two clear lines of light. Well, they've shifted into light. There's something about clearing out those channels. And so there is a new way of communicating, maybe with an aspect of your psyche, but maybe also with something or someone outside. But what I will suggest is that there is a rapid shift. There is something that comes in, change comes in a way that is invited in simply by sheer virtue of the fact that something else has shifted through. That viral rash has shifted through, the body is cleared, and then there is something else that can come in. If I look at the way that the cards progress, you've got the Hermit as in that little sketched figure in the Hermit card next to the face that's looking off into the past. There's something there about the past coming up to clear in the Ten of Swords. And then something here about then shifting in to something that's coming up in the near future. Now, when I say near future, it could be hours, it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. I'm not one for doing specific timelines in tarot. I quite frankly don't think that they're that relevant when it comes to inner processes. They work on their own schedule. But what's also interesting as well, you've got 9, 10, and 8. So it might be that there is something that comes up from the past that is ready to come in, that is in some way shifted, or there is someone from the past, or that there is a way of revisiting something that then is refreshed. that is ready to be embarked upon. Maybe a project that you had to shelve, that you've constantly been stymied by, that is now ready to be embarked upon because the Ten of Swords is this clearing out process. Who knows? It's going to be, again, individually to do with your own experiences, your own life, and what it is that you have been dealing with in terms of your psychological processes, but also the people, places, and things that you have encountered, and your own creative process in all of it. But in one way or another, the Eight of Wands is about clarity. It is about communication. It is about reciprocity. It is about clear channels of creative exchange. It is a knowingness, that kind of knowingness in the Hermit as well. It's a very, very energetic and very spiritual card. And when I say spiritual, there is something here about it having an impact on one's own creative energy, one's own creativity, on one's libido, and however that libido is expressed or experienced. And it is unfettered from the Ten of Swords. The Ten of Swords was merely a distortion of some of this energy, and now this energy is allowed to flow again, simply because there has been the recognition of a particular pattern, of a particular thing, of a particular moment that has never ever worked out the way that you wished, is never going to work, and your understanding of that now. And in that understanding, as I said, you are able to come to terms with that. You're finally able to accept that there is something here that is just intricately unworkable, and then that kind of all falls apart. Everything you start to see it for what it is, which is just utterly bonkers, as they say over here, and that then that clarity of thought can come in, and that is underpinned again by the Hermit, that knowingness, that knowledge, the courage to look inside, the courage to stay the course, to look inside, even when looking inside felt impossible, it felt shit, and in most of the time you didn't know what the hell was going on. That again, and I will remind you, is the path of the Hermit. That's not you straying off the path of the Hermit. That is the path of the Hermit. That light, that inner light that is nurtured, that is then in the swiftness, in the Eight of Wands, going between these two faces, is hard won. It is hard won, and the course isn't perfect. And if you are setting yourself up for judging yourself and saying, well, this can't be what I think it is simply because it doesn't feel as clear as I would like it to be, it doesn't feel as perfect as I would like it to be, I don't feel like I'm getting it quite right, then perhaps actually you are on the track of the Hermit in a way that you had never thought that you were. And I think perhaps that is that moment of the Ten of Swords as well, is to give up these ideas of perfection, which are ridiculous. They are absolutely ridiculous. And that actually the acceptance of oneself as a full, whole human being, we are so immersed in our own lives and our own psyches that of course everyday life is actually going to be a process of flailing around in the dark a lot of the time, or of not knowing, or waiting long periods of time. That's also very Hermit-like. When we are able to accept that that is part of the human condition, we place less stress on ourselves as having to live up to something that really isn't who we are. We can begin to relax a little bit more. We can begin to accept ourselves a little bit more, and we can begin to understand that Hermit is more feeling like, that process of realizing the Hermit through oneself is really more about the maze on that Hermit's face, of all of those different paths that we try, of things that look confusing, that things like, I'm not even going to bother to start because it all looks too complicated. How the hell am I going to make it through that? And then coming back to the idea that actually you're already at the center, and that is you. And that moment then is when the Eight of Wands can really happen. It's just about reaching that acceptance. And sometimes that simply means shifting that virus through. Until next time, whenever next time is, take very good care. If you want to subscribe to a little extra, you will find a link on my website. And as I said, I will probably be bringing out a podcast that goes into more depth about my thought processes about tarot and the place that it has in terms of where I think it can be most useful. But there are also plenty of other podcasts as well about tarot theory and practice, and I will be aiming to release at least 2 of those every month. So head on over to my website if you haven't subscribed already. It's $7. I did think that my podcasts were originally going to be about 10 to 15 minutes long, but actually they're turning out to be about between 20 and 30 minutes long. So you get quite a lot of bang for your buck. And you are more than free as well to send me suggestions for podcast discussion points. So if you want a particular podcast on something and you're a subscriber, I will record a podcast based on that if I possibly can. And in the meantime, take good care and thank you so much for listening.